So, welcome everybody to the session. And before we start, I would like to give you a quick, introduction to the session, what you can expect and what you can hear from our panelists. So, this is the rights-based approach to marine conservation as part of the UN Ocean Conference 2022. That's happening in today's the last day, in fact, in Lisbon, Portugal. So, this is the virtual side event of that session, and you had a number of side events as well as panel discussions and plenaries happening along this the past few days. And this is like the end point, the final day, but our efforts to conserve ocean does not stop here. And we are going to take this momentum forward and see what we can do in going towards COP15 as well, which is one of our given priorities. So to begin, as an introduction, rights-based approach, not just for human, I mean, you think about rights-based approach, you first think about human rights, but we have what in conservation we have like a mix of human rights as well as nature rights, which are important for biodiversity conservation, especially the marine sector, when you don't have monitoring mechanisms as well installed as you have in terrestrial environment. So this is one of the panel discussion that focuses on both the nature aspect as well as the human rights, and see where we can come together and what are the aspects which we can link, where are the intervention points. And also we have experts from High Seas Alliance who will also talk about the uncharted waters that we rarely think about. So this is like a good starting point for Gibbon as well in the aquatic working group. And we have members who are joining us from the Gibbon Aquatic Working Group and who you will hear from as we go forward in our session. And we'll be looking to write a report and also present our outcomes from the session at events and workshops and side events. So first, I would like to invite our first speaker for the session, Dr. Divya Karnar. So I'll give a quick introduction to Divya. So Divya is an international award-winning wildlife biologist and a human geographer, and she specializes in marine and coastal species and fisheries. And she takes an interdisciplinary approach to her work and integrates human and ecological dimensions of marine research. And internationally, through her work, she's the co-chair of the Human Dimensions Working Group of the IUCN Species Specialist Commission on Shark Specialist Group. So internationally, she contributes through her role as a co-chair of the Shark Specialist Group. And in India, she works as the assistant professor at the Department of Environmental Studies, Ashoka University, and she also heads the marine program at Foundation for Ecological Research, Advocacy and Learning. And Divya is also co-founder of a sustainable seafood initiative called In Season Fish, where she works with different stakeholders like chefs, restaurateurs, fishermen to ensure that India's marine life is protected. So we're very honored to have Divya as one of our speakers. And over to you, Divya.
Well today, so please excuse me. So I basically wanted to highlight the role of fishing communities today because I'm not sure how much they have really been spoken about during this UN conference. The fishing communities, I feel at least, are like storehouses of generational knowledge about the oceans. From what I know, they are also canaries in the coal mine because they have been telling us about shifting patterns and disturbances in the ocean. And I feel like the UN Ocean Conference has sort of lost an opportunity by not making fishing communities the centerpiece of the conference. In fact, fishing communities, I think, were so put off by not, being invited to, tell their side of the story that they had a sort of sister conference during this time. So the reason that I feel so strongly about this is because I've been working with fishing communities now for over a decade. And at a time when in India, at least, no one was really talking about climate change impacts in the ocean beyond just sea level rise. The fishing communities told me that there were dead zones that they were encountering in the Indian Ocean. I, of course, didn't take this very seriously because at that time there was no science to back this up. But eventually they had the last laugh because now the science has proved that such things exist in the Indian Ocean. So my entire experience with fishing communities has sort of been a negation of what the textbooks have told me. I had read literature that spoke about how fishermen were greedy capitalists who were just interested in taking the most out of the ocean and not interested in the long term, not interested in how their actions affected the ocean. And certainly there are some types of fishers who act in this way, but definitely not all of them. I found that there are many small and medium scale fishers who are invested in fisheries livelihoods, for their lifetime. This makes them, I think, even more concerned than any conservationist could be about the ecological sustainability of the ocean, because for them it's a question of putting food on the table. I'd sort of gone into my research with fishing communities thinking that as a conservationist, I would be going out there and educating them about sustainability and so on. But instead, I found that they were not only well aware about the idea that sustainability was the need of the hour, but they were already doing something about it. And clearly, the problem about fishing and how it is affecting the ocean lay elsewhere. So, in terms of the rights based approach, what I found in India during my work with small scale fishing communities was that in the absence of any in practice sort of legal framework to manage fisheries, the small scale fishing communities had come together to set up their own informal management systems. So these were systems where groups of villages actually had got together and decided that they would put restrictions on where and how people could fish. They would put restrictions on the types of gear that were permitted, the areas that were open for fishing or closed temporarily, and so on. And many of these practices I found while listing them out corresponded with global best practices for fisheries management. And no one was forcing them to do this, and no one had gone in to try and educate them about global best practices. This was something that they had come up with on their own. And as a result, they were often catching what was ecologically available rather than what was the most high value economically for seafood markets. So when I found that the majority of fishermen were fishing in this way, it made me realize that I needed to look elsewhere to sort of identify why it is that fishing still seems to be harming the ocean in this way. And so I began to look down the seafood supply chain and realized that there was a huge mismatch between what was being caught and what was being eaten. So some research that I did in India looked at what the high value urban markets in India were eating in terms of seafood. And with India being a tropical country, seemed like we had at least 100 different edible species of seafood that were available and could be eaten. But instead, in high value urban markets, people were just eating between 10 and 15 species. So what was happening to the rest of it? For the most part, they were either going into really low value supply chains like fish meal and so on. And before that, a lot of it even just used to be discarded. So there was a lot of waste and a lot of low value supply chains that were focusing on quantity rather than quality. And it seemed like this is where a real intervention needed to be made. So as a result, I worked with the fishing communities to sort of create ideas about how to sort of make some kind of intervention in this, and eventually set up In Season Fish. So In Season Fish is a sustainable seafood initiative that works in India to create more transparent seafood supply chains, provide advisories on what seafood people should eat, and also highlight the work of small scale fishermen in actually being more ecologically sustainable. So a lot of the work that we do is very on ground, where we take people out to fishing villages and fish markets, show them how to identify different species, what questions they should ask to the fish sellers, show them what happens when they do not think about where their fish is coming from, and so on. And also we do a lot of work on social media to sort of create awareness and things like that. So what we have found from this kind of thing is that when we include the fishing communities as one of our partners in conservation, it seems like everyone takes the whole issue more seriously. The fishing communities are invested in sustainability. The consumers also feel some kind of connection to fishing communities. And rather than just talking about fisheries management or fishing commons and so on, we can start talking about commons along the seafood supply chain, like the people from harvesters to traders to consumers. Everyone can sort of get together and form a community of people who are deeply interested in what is going to happen to the future of the oceans. So I think I'll leave you there with this thought that one does need to keep all channels open for everybody to participate in the conservation of the oceans. And this means working with everyone who has anything to do with the oceans, particularly the fishing communities, because they have been invested in this for generations now.
Thank you so much, Divya. I think that's a good start to a session also where we are looking at fisher folk, fishing community to be a champions or to be to lead the conservation rather than us forcing anything on oceans or them. They'll actually lead the conservation for us. If any of you have any questions, unfortunately, Divya might not be able to stay with us for the whole session because she's under the weather a little bit. So if you have any questions, do put in the chat, and if she's online now, she'll answer them, or we can also compile and send it to her so that she can then respond to your questions as well. So if you have any questions, please do put it in the chat. Otherwise, we also have a Q&A session towards the end. So after all of our speakers, we have a Q&A session after that as well. So before that, I'd first like to play the opening statement from our Gibbon members, who are a policy member, Mirna, and two of our Kenyan chapter members, who are actually on ground now in Kenya after the Nairobi negotiations, CBD negotiations. So we have a small message from them, which I'll play now. So.
Jambo from Kenya. I'm Nevi Lagesa, GBYN chapter, Kenyan chapter. I'm Brian Omondi, GBYN, Kenyan chapter.
I am Mirna Fernandez from the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. I'm the policy co-coordinator and also from the Bolivian chapter.
Okay, continue.
We are here to explain a little bit on why rights-based approaches is a core priority from the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, and I am pleased to have two young experts on marine conservation on the ground that are going to explain you why.
Okay, sustainable conservation can only be achieved through environmental information provided to the community that manages these resources and lives adjacent to this kind of resources. And this does not only stop at the point where we do the implementation part, because most organizations they do inform the communities during the implementation of these conservational projects. But beyond that, the data that we get from this conservational project, it doesn't really trickle down back to the community so that they know the purpose of this data and its use. And because most of the time this data we get it published books and articles that is only reachable to intellectuals and the academia. Communities have people who really never went to school that much and they've got no knowledge and idea about these technologies. So coming back to them with this information and giving an interpretation to them will help them feel as part of these conservational projects, and then they feel like they own these resources. Also, the security of climate, environmental, and conservational, I can call them the conservational whistleblowers, have to be assured. These are people who tell us when we have a gap back in our ecosystems, and ignoring them or eliminating them is not really an option, because by doing so there is still a challenge that we create back in our ecosystems, and from their experiences and the views that they give will really help us achieve sustainable decision making. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian.
and I'm in to bring the issue of systems conservation. I think there are a number of things that are missing, especially when it comes to representation of the local communities at some of these conservational standards and levels, and all the way from the local level to international. There's a gap. Like most of the time you find when projects are coming in, there's less representation of the community and nobody cares. What next? They'll just come, pump in the project, how it's going to affect the community. They don't want to care, especially for their own benefit. So there's lack of representations during the conceptualization, during the monitoring processes, during the reporting back. That gap is really missing, and this is now really bringing in a lot of concept. When it comes to mangrove conservation, the community, they don't see the importance of conserving mangrove, because you'll find most of the projects that are coming in, they're government projects, but they're told, go and replant, go do restoration. But at the end of the day, they will never know at the end of the day, why are they doing that? How are they going to do it? But they'll just be told, this is the way to follow here, if you don't want, you are eliminated from the scene. And this is something that really pains them, and they feel like they just need to be involved through all the processes, which will really help guide and really help. They have very important information that can be used to help in conservation of marine resources. Another thing that is coming up is the issue of using firearms for the purposes of conservation of marine ecosystem or biodiversity. That is something that is really paining them. Sometimes you find a community member arrested for no good reason, because over the years he has been using the resource. But as time goes by, treaties are being made at international level. They are not trickled, or at national level, and they are not trickled down. They are never given information as to why they are opposed to use or not to overuse such a thing. Then this is now really bringing in a lot of problems. The arrests and the ambushes is not a solution, but a solution is narrowing down to community, giving them, empowering them, teaching them, and telling them this is your resource, take care of it. Then it will bring a big change into our marine conservation sectors. I pass on the information now, my hand to my colleague.
Thank you so much. And yes, these are some of the reasons why in the Global Youth Biodiversity Network we think that we need rights at the core of marine conservation and conservation in general. We need to protect the safety of environmental defenders, to ensure the access to information, participation and justice, and engage the communities properly to ensure that these conservation strategies are really going to work. Thank you so much for
So that was the members from our on-field work who are doing amazing work on field in Kenya. So they are also chapter members, coordinators, and Mirna, who is leading our policy team at the negotiations. So now I'll hand the floor to Esther, who will lead you to an icebreaker session. Esther, I think you should be able to.
Yes. Hi everyone from Kenya, and I feel so happy to have seen some of our work showcased on this platform, and it's going to energize us and give us more enthusiasm to continue doing the good works that we are doing. So I'm here for the icebreaker, and I'm so sorry if I designed something that is going to be hard on anybody, if it appears to be hard on anybody, but it is just something that seeks to gauge our understanding on how much we know about the ocean, and also other things that are related to the ocean. So I'm gonna share my a link on the chat box where you can access on your phone or your laptop. I'm gonna give you a pin that you can access in order to start playing the game when I start the game. So the rules of the game are like, it's going to provide you with, you're supposed to answer every question within 20 seconds. So basically, if it's brainstorming and everything, you're supposed to do that within 20 seconds, answer the question, and then I can go to the next slide So I'm gonna start the game right now, and you can. I'm not really sure if you guys can see from your end, but I've already started.
Esther, can you share the link again, Esther? I think.
I shared the link on the chat box. I shared the link. It's going to project. Yeah, it's going to project the pin that you're supposed to key in so that you can start playing the game. I'm not sure why it can't. Yeah, it started. So it's loading. Just give it a few moments, a few seconds. So there's the pin. You can key in on your device. And then when you key in, it's going to ask you to input your nickname or your name. And then I can see your names appearing on the screen. That is only when I'm gonna be sure the person who is in for the game. I can see Lydia. Yeah, I can see other people joining. I'm going to give like 1 minute for everybody to make to be able to join. If everybody is okay, you can give me a thumbs up so that I can start and not leave anyone behind. Can already see we have 7 people ready to play the game. We have 8 now. I think I'm gonna start the game now. No, we have people still joining. Now we have 10 participants ready to start. So I think I'm gonna go now. If you've been left behind, you're gonna be here cheering the team and make sure that they're ready to grab the win. So that is the game. How much do I know of the ocean? And it's going to start in 1. That is the first question. And you have 20 seconds to select your answer. And I hope at the end of the game, I can see you guys at the top of the mountain, like everybody win. I don't know what happened to my game now. It can't go to the next slide.
Your presenters mode is on.
Sorry? I don't know, I can't go to the next slide. Let me see. Yeah, I'm in presenter mode, but I can't go to my next slide.
What about the next on top?
Sorry?
The next on top. It says next. On the right,
No. I don't know what happened.
You want to try resharing then? Your screen, maybe it worked then.
I think I tried to share that again, but I still can't proceed.
maybe if we can play this, start this again towards the end, or again if it's not working right now.
Yeah.
Or you just try resharing again, and once more we'll give it a chance once more, and then otherwise if it doesn't, we can.
Let me stop sharing and then
Yeah.
I can start sharing again. Or, yeah, let me start sharing again. I'm not sure if I have shared my screen already.
No, we can't see anything now.
Now I'll give you a lot of work because we might have to join the game again.
Yeah, so we'll take it towards the end. Like once our speakers are done, we can have like a refresh your game with yours.
All right, I can. Yes, I can meanwhile be figuring out what is happening with the sharing of my. Yeah. Sorry.
So we'll go on to the next speaker, who's joining us from Sweden. We have Ida Muller. So Ida is Ida is a law student and an environmental activist. She's a member of the Swedish Legal Environmental Organization, which is an environmental activist organization. It's comprised of law students and newly graduated lawyers. And their aim is to maximize the efficient use of environmental law for environmental protection. So they offer free legal counseling to environmental organizations, and they advocate for sufficient frameworks. The largest project so far is a human rights-based climate lawsuit against the Swedish state. And Ida is also especially interested in conservation and ecocide as a crime and rights of nature. So we'll have Ida as a next speaker. Over to you, Ida.
Thank you so much. I'll share my screen. So there we go. Thank you so much for the introduction and for having me at this important event. I think that my connection might be a little bit slow. Do tell me if it is, and I will shut off my camera. So today I'm going to talk about potential, if a tad visionary, rights-based legal methods to achieve robust conservation of the oceans in the European context. And first of all, let's talk about rights of nature frameworks as a potential method to ensure marine conservation. Rights of nature can be described as the notion that natural entities, such as ecosystems or plants or animals or rivers, can be seen as legal entities with legal rights. In Canada and in Bangladesh, for example, among other states, there are rivers who have been granted the right to a healthy biodiversity and legal personhood. This means that the rivers can, through a guardian, go to court and sue those who pollute, overexploit, or otherwise harm it. The conservation potential in granting the ocean rights like these are great. If the ocean could sue you for harming its biodiversity, you could face the risk of being charged with paying for the restoration of the harm you caused. Such potent incentives would likely lead to the harm decreasing. The rights of marine ecosystems, however, are not recognized in European legal systems. Since rights of nature could be such a meaningful tool for marine conservation, I think it is interesting to investigate what lies in the way of adopting rights of nature frameworks for ocean rights in Europe. So there are a range of European challenges in the struggle towards ocean rights. Cultural and economic challenges need to be overcome by the cultural shift towards sustainability and awareness of codependence that is necessary to tackle the global crisis of mass extinction and climate emergency. Systematic legal challenges can be overcome through coordinated legislative efforts. It is possible, as has been shown before. But let me now get into other potential rights-based approaches to marine conservation in Europe. Europe has a strong legal protection of human rights, particularly through the European Convention of Human Rights and its accompanying Court of Human Rights. There is case law from the European Court of Human Rights stipulating that a state's obligation to protect the human rights to life and health contains a duty to protect humans from environmental harm. Most of the court's case law on this subject has concerned local situations where the applicant has been or risks becoming directly affected. This type of case law could be relevant for conservation of European marine ecosystems if there are local people whose human rights are endangered by the ecosystem not being conserved. However, if we want to conserve marine ecosystems that are not close to people, or if we want to conserve the health of the vast entirety of the ocean, the legal argumentation gets trickier. The question is, if human rights in the European context can be used as an argument for protection of large, even global, natural systems who as a whole are absolutely vital for the health of humanity. And the answer to this question, hopefully, is yes. And this hope is due to this. There is an ever-growing movement of national European climate litigation that has shown that European states can be obligated to protect the human rights to life and health by mitigating greenhouse gas emissions and thereby mitigating the dangers of the entire climate crisis. The climate system is a large natural system. Billions of humans are directly dependent upon its health, and said health is directly threatened by human activities, just like the ocean. The United Nations Environment Programme has also underlined the importance of the ocean health to investigate the possibility to take the human rights-based method that is used for litigation aimed at protecting the climate and try to apply this method in litigation aimed at the conservation of the oceans. And to sum up, there are plenty of rights-based legal methods that can be used to boost marine conservation in the European context. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Aida, for giving us an overview. It happens in the European context. I think that you gave us a very good overview of what guys and what are the provisions that are available. Co-coordinator of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network Southeast Asia, and he works on protected area management and is a specialist of the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity, and he holds a master's degree in environmental management and tropical marine ecosystem management. Mark advocates in harmonizing science and traditions, developing participatory, inclusive reef environment management and biodiversity conservation. He's been supporting many community established marine areas and indigenous community conserved areas. So he'll be giving us an idea about the Southeast Asian context for rights-based approaches. Over to you, Mark.
Hello, everyone. Good evening from the Philippines. I'm Mark again, and let me just share you my screen. Okay. So everyone seeing my screen now? So I want to jump off from Divya's sentiments on making fisher-folk communities at the center of the conference. So we have been talking about ecosystems for so many decades now, and it's about time to also focus on how communities are affected by what I'm showing you next is some of the photos here in the Philippines, how connected our communities to the ocean. So I'm saying, and most of the time there are gender roles in fisher-folk communities. On what you can see, the people on the right, the two men are the ones who are actually leading the fishing, and the women are actually the ones who are leading the post-processing of the catch fish. So these are some of the dynamics of oceans that we wanted to look into in terms of rights-based approaches to marine conservation. Also, what I'm showing you are other dynamics of the ocean in the Philippines, for example. So at the middle, you see a fisher who's actually catching a large tuna. I think it's a yellowfin. And in the Philippines, marine fisheries is one of the protein source, wherein in the province where I come from, 90% of the population are actually dependent on marine fisheries. So as you can see on the right as well. And on the left, as you can see, communities, fisherfolk communities, including the indigenous peoples and local communities, are also able to help in terms of data gathering that can be used for management. So you can see on the left photos here where the women are actually looking into the status of the seagrass beds, where most of the women are actually able to glean from shells and crabs and shrimps. And below on the picture on the left are some of the features who are actually taking an active role in terms of looking into the corals on the coral reef. So these are some of the functions and purposes and other able to do things of the communities in terms of marine fisheries and ocean conservation. But again, just to also highlight some of the realities of the ground, we have been talking about the declining ecosystems and marine resources, and it's actually happening. So in the Philippines, according to the Philippine Statistics Authority, some of the tunas are actually declining. And as you can see in the figure now, I'm showing you some of the species who are actually economically important for the Philippines. And as you can see on the graph, they are not slowly declining. There's a huge decline. No, if you can see the slope, there's a deep slope of the decline of the fisheries. And one more important thing is that one of the researchers of Watts in 2021 shows that there are lots of fisher folks who have a different perspective on marine resources. So I'm showing you the graph that there are fisher folks who think that marine resources are inexhaustible or they can replenish for themselves. So there are lots of efforts that has to be done in terms of communication campaigns so that fisher folks would actually look into a different perspective and see that the realities are actually different from their perceptions on declining fisheries, for example. And another realities from the ground is that at the local government level, so in the Philippines, among other Southeast Asian countries, the government has the mandate for marine conservation. But in the Philippines, for example, there are little expertise that actually looks into coastal and marine resources. So most of the time, expertise are in forestry, in agriculture, but very less on coastal and marine resources. So this is kind of like one of the challenges to really have a rights-based approach to marine conservation because there are little expertise that should actually look into that. For that, no, just similar to Divya, I want to also leave three main concepts in terms of rights-based approaches to marine conservation. So the first is to look into traditional protection systems for marine areas. In Southeast Asia, we have a diverse culture that actually looks into marine conservation. There are ancestral waters being managed by indigenous communities. So right-based approach conservation looks and respects these traditional protection systems. Another is that rights-based approaches encourages stewardship and collaboration. So it looks into the participatory process and inclusive process to bring in different stakeholders in terms of marine conservation. It's not just top-down approach, but it also considers bottom-up approaches that looks into the needs, capacities, and other strengths of communities in terms of marine conservation. And another is that looking into social safeguards. Rights-based approaches to marine conservation, very important is to look into social safeguards, especially those who are displaced when you declare a protected area, for example, in marine, and also to really answer the threat transfer, because threat transfers are very kind of like dominant here when you create your protected area. So you have to make sure that there are social safeguards when you do your rights-based approaches to marine conservation. So I guess these are three important things to be reminded of when we look into rights-based approaches to marine conservation. And again, we also wanted to highlight the role of the youth in terms of really looking into the rights-based approaches to marine conservation. So I'm showing you now photos of youth doing actions on the ground and bringing it to the global plenary and bringing the voices to the global discussions to influence global policies and frameworks. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mark. I think that's a wonderful presentation. I think there's a continuation of what Divya also said. You're also reiterating the fact that local communities can't be taken out of the equation. And, you know, the rights of nature and rights of humans should go hand in hand, which is what we're also trying to push through our session today now. Now, I'd like to move on to my next speaker for the session. Dr. Elisa Morguera. So she's a professor of global environmental law at the University of Strathclyde Law School and the director of One Ocean Hub, which is a pioneering organization that integrates human rights in ocean science and policy to support the fair and inclusive decision-making for healthy ocean, where people and planet flourish together. So, Elisa, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and greetings from Lisbon. I have to say I've been so impressed by the previous speakers. I wish you were all here, but I'm also happy to report that many of the points you made have been discussed here in Lisbon, and there's definitely, compared to the first UN Ocean Conference, much more understanding and references and engagement with small-scale fishers, environmental human rights defenders, the need to protect traditional approaches to marine conservation. So there's definitely a lot of change in terms of understanding and narrative here in Lisbon, but a lot more work needs to be done, and it still remains maybe more on the sidelines or as quick references in more official meetings. And your presentations have really shown the depth of the work and the thinking out there that needs to be done. And I certainly see how youth is already leading on this and should be recognized in that leading role even more. So what I would like to present today very briefly, and I hope I'm coming across clearly, I'm in one of the corridors of the conference, is some of the work that we're conducting at the One Ocean Hub, particularly on the use of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child as a key instrument to advance the protection of everybody's human rights in relation to marine conservation. And particularly a process that's currently ongoing led by the UN Committee on the Human Rights of the Child to develop a new general comment on children's rights to a healthy environment, and how important it is that a healthy ocean is seen as part of that, and how we need, I think, still to bring together the human rights and marine conservation communities together. Again, really following the example of all the panelists that have preceded me. So just very quickly to say, the One Ocean Hub is a research collaboration, research for sustainable development. I'm not gonna say all the details of who we are, but just to let you know that we are working in the global north and the global south, very much learning from each other. And many of my colleagues in the global south are working very closely and co-developing knowledge on human rights and the ocean in Ghana, Namibia, and South Africa, very much working with small-scale fishers, indigenous peoples, coastal communities, but also civil society, youth organizations, and educators. And we're also engaging the UN in this process so that any learning we can get can be spread across also international discussions and integrated in UN instruments that can have influence on what governments do. And we're very, very honored to have the Global Youth Biodiversity Network on our advisory board and work quite closely with UNEP and other members of the Children's Environmental Rights Initiative in these endeavors. So what is, I think, really important, I know all the people on this call are very familiar with the ocean and work in biodiversity conservation, but we have to be aware of the reality out there, which is that while there is more thinking across the interconnections between the global biodiversity loss crisis, the climate change crisis, and the toxics crisis, integrated thinking is still not quite there. And in particular, the connections between land and freshwater, where I think more attention is still focused, and the ocean is lagging behind. And the role of the ocean in addressing those interlinked global challenges is not fully understood. And that's particularly because I think the human rights colleagues working on the connections with the environment have really made a lot of strides on the climate change front, but unfortunately are maybe less familiar with the challenges in terms of biodiversity and particularly marine biodiversity. So we have noted that in some key UN reports on children's rights to a healthy environment, the ocean is never mentioned. And this hopefully is changing, but I think it just shows that we need more allies in terms of putting forward a human rights-based approach to marine conservation. On the other hand, I think the science is very clear in showing how even with no further international developments, with the international law we have and the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, it's very clear that key children's rights are affected by the declining health of the ocean and the fact that the ocean produces half of the oxygen we breathe, contributed to climate change, which is one of the most prominent environmental issues that children and youth out there are being active on, and of course contributes to a whole series of other impacts on human health. And children have specific rights, not just to health, but to development and survival. So that really helps from a legal perspective to take in mind the long-term effects on children today, but also on their quality of life and their opportunities later on in their life. Of course, the right to food, to water, but also the right to culture and the right to play, which I think is really important and unique to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And of course, I think a really important link between the right to education and the right to science, and how we need, again, if we have this connection between human rights protection, the ocean, climate change, and biodiversity, that is clearly reflected in current education opportunities. And that has knock-on effects on the opportunities for children and youth to exercise in an informed way their political rights and influence those processes. So a really important point in terms of children-led research, research that contributes to the priority needs of youth, and then feeding that into education with a view to protecting all the other substantive and procedural rights of children and young people. Particularly those procedural rights, you may all be aware, that have been mentioned before in terms of access to environmental information, participation in decision-making, and crucial, something that is often lagging behind, access to justice, as well as a broader cross-cutting obligation to non-discrimination, have to be thought in terms of the more specific processes that we know in marine conservation and ocean management more generally, and really thinking about the information available, where we are with the science, but also the fact that ocean science is still advancing and we know less about the ocean than outer space. So that's an important element to think about. But also the specific use, for instance, of marine spatial planning, and how aware the colleagues working in the area are about children and young people's rights, and are they developing methods for children and young people to exercise their rights in that context. I think these are all areas where we need to advance knowledge and develop appropriate tools, and maybe learn from human rights activists and experts that have advanced children's rights in other areas. And I'm very pleased that another panelist has already mentioned the issue of children and young people as ocean defenders and environmental human rights defenders. I think another really important area to raise awareness and create appropriate structures to enable their participation. So with that, I think I just want to focus now on what is the understanding, I think, that it's emerging, and it's quite clear about what states need to do to protect human rights in the context of marine conservation, including protecting children's rights. And this is really based on the work that the former UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment, John Knox, has done. Really brilliant reports on explaining how international biodiversity obligations are also international human rights law obligations, and how we need to think about existing international human rights obligations in conservation and marine conservation as well. And so what he has clarified is that we all have a right for our governments to develop and maintain non-regressive and precautionary measures on biodiversity. And so that speaks about the minimum content and minimum ambition that we need from a human rights perspective in ocean conservation measures, legislative, administrative, implementation ones, including children and young people in decision-making, such as the establishment of a marine protected area, but of course also decisions around its management, and any other decision that might negatively impact, for instance, on a marine protected area or other area-based management approaches. Assessing the effects of those proposed biodiversity conservation measures on children and young people, as well as, of course, other human rights holders, and on that basis prevent any unjustified and foreseeable infringements of human rights that may arise from those decisions on biodiversity. And this is really not just decisions in the biodiversity sector, but of course decisions in other sectors such as tourism, mining, infrastructure, where decisions can have negative impacts on ocean conservation, as well as other elements of biodiversity activity, and have knock-on effects on the human rights of those who depend on a healthy ocean. There's, of course, very clear and convergent international obligations related to supporting and providing direct funding to indigenous peoples on conservation initiatives and other local communities initiatives. And so the work that the Convention on Biological Diversity has done on ICAS, and of course the work of the ICA Consortium, is really important here and crucial in human rights terms, both everyone's human rights as well as children's human rights. And finally, the role of states as donors to ensure through safeguards that no funded project on biodiversity conservation, including marine conservation, has negative impacts on human rights, including the rights of children and young people. But equally, and I think this is a really important area for all of us to work on, to make sure that the funding actually reaches and maybe prioritizes marine conservation that protects human rights, is led by human rights holders, and ideally youth-led as well. And so the final point I want to make, which I think the previous panelists have already alluded to, is that we need to share your voices across the very vast landscape of international processes that have to do with the ocean, directly and indirectly. And that's a big job. And I think the Global Youth Biodiversity Network is already doing tremendous work here at the UN Ocean Conference, at the CBD, but we have to think about allies and others that can connect the messages across. For instance, the negotiations of a new treaty on plastics, the negotiations and the implementation of an agreement recently on fisheries subsidies. All this will be decisions made internationally that have impacts on ocean conservation and marine conservation, and need to take into account human rights, but also benefit for being better targeted to real needs from the views of human rights holders, including youth. And just to say that some of the work that we're doing at the One Ocean Hub is really to show that this is not just something that makes sense legally, but in fact, it's really a good practice. It can be used in a programmatic way for public authorities and others to work together to better join up thinking around marine conservation and all the other SDGs that depend on it. And to, I think the point that was made earlier, also to build each other's capacity in advancing on decisions on marine conservation and implementing them in an equitable way without leaving anybody behind. And in fact, allowing all of us to benefit from the priority that should be given to children's best interests, because those interests are the interests for the long term and can really benefit all of us today and in the future. So I'll stop there, and just to say this last slide is on purpose a bit messy and overwhelming, but it just shows that we have opportunities to, I think, spread the discussions that are being conducted today in your event across many other processes, and UNEP and other partners are keen to support that work. So thank you so much for the opportunity to join you today, and I look forward to the rest of the presentations.
Thank you, Leslie, for this wonderful, informative presentation on taking a different angle at ocean rights and human rights and focusing on children, and how exactly focusing on children can ensure that we have a healthy environment going forward by considering the rights of humans and nature in the process. So I think our last presentation is by Lydia and June. And Lydia, I'll introduce both of them. So Lydia is a 20-year-old marine research science student and ocean and climate activist. She has taken part in a lot of climate justice networks and Fridays for Future. She coordinates those activities as well. And she's involved in both regional and international ocean initiatives. She's also the High Seas Youth Ambassador and works with other youth from around the world to ensure that the youth voices are heard in these high seas treaty and negotiations. June is also a High Seas Youth Ambassador, and she's an intern at CIES. So I'll hand the floor to both of them to take as the last presentation.
Thank you, and hello everyone. It's great to be here. So like you just introduced, I'm Lydia. And I'm Jihyun. And we're youth ambassadors with the High Seas Alliance. And we're going to talk a little bit about the High Seas Treaty that is being negotiated this year and how that kind of ties into a rights-based approach. But to begin, I would like to start and define what the high seas are. So each country that has a coastline has something called the exclusive economic zone, which stretches 200 nautical miles out from the coast. And beyond that, we have waters that aren't really within any individual country's jurisdiction. So that is what we call areas beyond national jurisdiction, or ABNJ, and also called the high seas. And the high seas cover almost half of our planet's surface and more than 2/3 of the ocean. So it really is a vast area we're talking about. And since there's no individual countries regulating these areas, the question is also who has the right to using the high seas. or benefiting from them? And the answer to that is really that the high seas belong to everyone and no one at the same time. So how can we ensure that everyone can benefit from equal rights and equal benefits from these waters? As I mentioned before, right now a new treaty is being negotiated, the BBNJ Treaty or High Seas Treaty. And this treaty will consist of 4 parts that we're going to go into really quickly right now. The first part is about marine genetic resources, or MGRs. And those are genetic resources we get from organisms in the ocean, including in the high seas. And so far, the problem has been that they have been kind of used as a first come, first served basis, which also results in that those countries who have the capacity and the technology to go out into the high seas and to do research there also get to profit off of the resources and the resulting products. So since they are using what is kind of the common heritage of humankind, we also want to ensure that the profits can be distributed equally for everyone and that everyone gets the benefit, and a high seas treaty could help us establish one of a kind of equal benefit sharing regime. The second part is about marine protected areas, or MPAs, on the high seas, because right now only about 1% of the high seas is under some sort of protection. And that is because we really just don't have any way to implement MPAs, which the treaty could help with. And how does that tie into human rights? Well, destructive activities in the high seas, such as large-scale industrial fishing, deep-sea mining, and so on, doesn't only impact the high seas, but also the rest of the ocean, because as we know, the ocean is connected, including coastal waters and coastal communities, and everyone who gets their livelihoods from the ocean, and everyone else who's dependent on the ocean in some way, which is all of us. So in protecting the high seas and restoring this biodiversity, there is really a question about human rights for everyone who lives from the ocean. Another aspect to this is also the intergenerational aspect, because future generations also have the same right to benefit from the high seas. And in order to preserve that right, we also need to care for the ecosystems there.
Okay, and following the marine protected areas are environmental impact assessments, also known as EIAs. EIAs are basically a tool to make sure that decision makers think about the likely effects on the environment at the earliest possible time, to avoid, reduce, or offset those potentially negative effects. So for example, we can talk about, how does deep sea mining affect our whole ecosystem and health of the ocean? Like, these kinds of questions would be considered when it comes to environmental impact assessments. So how does this connect with equal rights? If we think about the ocean, it's one big mass. It's all connected to one another. So if area A is impacted, area B will also be impacted. This comes really important, and this part of the treaty comes really important because, for example, there's a case in Japan where they're trying to exhaust radioactive waste into their oceans in 2023. Currently, we don't have any laws to prevent them from doing so. So if we do have the BBNJ treaty and if we have the EIAs, and when it's carried on the whole ocean, we can prevent the whole ocean from being impacted. And it's really important because coastal areas, their main food sources come from the ocean. So if Japan does continue to exhaust radioactive waste into their oceans, other communities will be affected. The next one is capacity building and transfer of marine technology. Capacity building has an effect of benefit sharing mechanism to ensure that all countries can access and benefit from the global commons, which are the high seas, and not just a few selected countries. It's really important because technology development often leads to the effective use of sources. So if we don't have capacity building part in the package, by having it, we can prevent more developed countries from dominating the benefits, because the high seas, it's not just the people who have the technology or the investment, the resource, like it's not only for them, but it's for everyone. So by having this part, we can ensure that the ocean is for everyone. Now we brought this tripod fish from deep down from the high seas, bringing some messages. First one is that we have to understand that every element impacts one another. As we've seen on the previous slide, it's a cycle. It's just not, we can't take one sector out. It's a whole package that we need in order to protect the high seas. The second thing is to alert your government officials, stakeholders, friends, teachers, family about the issue, because the civil society's voices is going to be extremely important when it comes to a strong legally binding high seas treaty. And finally, we have to always remember that there are people and communities whose lives depend on the ocean, which directly connects to the activities that people do in the high seas. And with that, we have our email addresses on the bottom right. So if you have any further questions or concerns, please feel free to email us. And thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Libby and June. Thank you for talking to us on the high seas part of the high seas part of the side, ocean side. And I think before we go into audience Q&A and the game that Esther was trying to engage us with, I thought we'll have a small discussion on finding a solution or a way forward in terms of how we can incorporate rights-based approach into our, how maybe officials or we as civil society can ensure that a rights-based approach is integrated into ocean conservation. So I think a question that I would like to ask all participants, and maybe we can start with Ida and then go on, is that how do you think, Ida, that you've spoken to us about how rivers and streams under European law can be, can be recognized as individuals, or they have kind of protection they can be rendered protection under the European law. But where exactly do you see, that this nature rights or even human rights fitting into European law, where they can actually benefit people or benefit nature on ground, like the interventions that within the European system where it's possible?
This is a very difficult question, and I think that perhaps Elisa will have more knowledge about this. But I do believe that the European legal system needs to be changed from the bottom up. There will be a need for revolutionary changes if we want to incorporate rights of nature. But since that has been done before with every emancipation movement, for example, when women gained rights, there was a broad change of the legal system. So I believe that it is possible. There are hurdles, there are rights of exploitation and rights of ownership to natural entities that would have to be circumspected or changed. But I do believe that it is possible to make such a structural legal change.
Okay, is it your personal experience of looking at the climate justice movement? You feel like that's kind of a same system, or that approach can be applied to oceans as well?
Yes, this is also not very legally founded, but since that is a movement using law as a means of protection to protect a large system whose direct impact on specific humans is very difficult to show. I do believe that perhaps we can take that just the same method with the ocean, since the ocean also has a large impact on us as a community, everyone as a community, while it perhaps not being very easy to show that it has a direct impact on one specific person living on the European mainland, for example. So I think that it is a broad approach that we perhaps could use for another large natural system.
Leslie, do you want to take it on from there? Like, where do you see fitting into the European context, in the African context, where we can kind of ensure that it's followed on? Liza, can you hear?
Are you talking to me? Sorry, the audio got a bit coming in and out. Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, so I just wanted to follow up on Ida's question about how do you see a rights-based approach fitting into the European context or the African context, where we can it kind of ensures that it's followed on ground, and it's not just talk about we have to do this, but it's actually followed. Where can you see it fitting in?
Yeah, so in a way, we have seen already protection of environment-related human rights in the European human rights context. I mean, it's been less imaginative than, for instance, what we've seen in the inter-American context, and to some extent also the African regional context. So there are, there's been some progress, and then some barriers and some limitation to how much the existing European human rights framework can evolve. It could do much more, and there are discussions about developing potentially a new instrument specifically on environmental human rights, so that may be an opportunity. Yeah, I think there's a lot that can be done with our existing international obligations in the European and regional context, just being a bit more imaginative about which international obligation we bring to work. And I still remember that when I was discussing something similar for the context of Scotland with the former UN Special Rapporteur on Toxics, he was saying that the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child is still very unutilized as an instrument that can support recognition of environmental rights and potentially even nature's rights. So there's a potential there.
So let's just one more question. So do you see the child rights also improving, the situation child rights also improving, because the youth rights are just beginning to be recognized now, as we see with the work that Gibbon does. They're just beginning to recognize youth rights, and we are slowly but surely just joining into the mainstream discussions. So how do you see child rights with respect to this? I mean, even though it's not talked of as much, especially the education sector, yes, but in the context of environmental sector, as you mentioned, it's not spoken of as yet. So, but how do you see it progressing, say within a few years' time?
Yeah, I think that maybe in the next year, there may be a game-changing year for children and young people's rights. I mean, first of all, the UN system as a whole has committed to mainstream children's human rights into their work. So now we have allies in every UN agencies to do this work. UNEP is very committed, and so we should use that and give specific proposals to UNEP, for instance, about what kind of work we need as a priority in terms of UN support. But secondly, this new general comment from the UN Committee on Children's Rights will really be raising awareness across the whole children's human rights community and children's practitioners. And so that we might have a whole new set of new allies that, okay, we'll need some mutual capacity building, I think, with you and others in terms of understanding the specific challenges in marine conservation, but come in with a lot of tools and approaches and knowledge about how to make children's rights a reality. So I think things are really on the tip of changing a lot on this.
That's good to hear. I think that's a positive takeaway for the session as well, that it's beginning to change and we're beginning to see the differences.
I think they lost their connection. Shruti and Smita. So while we are waiting for them, are there any other questions from the participants? Oh yeah, Sudha is here.
Yeah.
Sudha.
Sorry, Mark. I
Yeah,
think there was an issue with that. Yeah. So the question was, question basically was, have you seen any positive instances on ground where you have actually seen people's views taken into consideration before MPs are formed? And do you think that's one of the main interventions where we can do to ensure that a rights-based approach is taken to marine conservation?
Sudha, is it for me or?
Yeah, it's for you. It's for you.
Yeah,
The Southeast Asia, yeah.
Yeah, I think there are many efforts from the communities who are actually now doing amazing work on marine conservations, and they have been lobbying and also doing an active role in data gathering and all the process towards, for example, marine protected area establishments. And for the last decade, I think there's also a progress where the government sees how important communities are and other stakeholders like women, youth, that can really participate in different processes for marine conservation. And right now, many communities are also able to lobby on influencing policies in terms of marine conservation as well, at the local level and at the national level. So right now in the Philippines, for example, the amendment for the Fisheries Code has taken consideration for the local communities and their dependency and marine conservation as well. So I think on that side, there has been progress in incorporating the participatory process and the inclusive process to really bring in indigenous communities, local communities, women and youth in terms of marine conservation. Yeah.
So do you, yeah, no, this one more follow. So do you, which intervention do you think has like a will going forward will have the most impact on ensuring that the communities are involved and a rights-based approach is taken? Which intervention do you think will have that effect?
I think one of the interventions that really will have an effect is to really create a systematic change, transformational change in terms of, for example, an educational system for the Southeast Asian countries, which really includes building capacity and understanding more of the marine ecosystems and how each systems are connected to one another, like for example, the pollution, for example, and to other rights-based approaches. So I think there's a lot of, there should be an intervention there, and there are progress step by step in terms of really incorporating to the educational system to really include how important IPLCs are, for example, and how traditional knowledge are important to looking into protecting rights for marine conservation. So in terms of transformational change on the educational side, those are the interventions that really would have an impact, not just on the local level, but to the global level as well. And there has been little step towards achieving that as well.
Thank you for taking that question also. And I think before I open up, I think I just have a question for Lydia and June as well with regard to the high seas. Like you did mention about how high seas is, there's nobody is prevented from going into high seas and nobody is encouraged also. So where do you see this rights-based kind of a dialogue fitting in there, where we don't know what kind of activity is actually happening out in the high seas? So do you think that mapping those activities is the first step forward to ensuring that a rights-based approach is taken there?
Yeah, so the thing right now with the high seas is that all of the regulations come from entirely different institutions that don't really talk to each other. So there are some institutions regulating, for example, shipping, and others regulating fisheries and all of that. But it's so difficult because it's so fragmented. So what we want to see in a treaty is bringing those together and having like a larger framework in order to be able to talk about activities, how to ensure everyone's rights are taken into consideration. So that is like one part, but the other part is also that, as someone mentioned before, for example, monitoring is basically non-existent in the high seas. So if we're, for example, talking about human rights abuses that are happening a lot in fisheries on the high seas and on vessels, there's a lot that needs to happen in terms of transparency and monitoring. Do you have anything to add?
Well, the 4 packages that we did talk about in our presentation is what the BBNJ Treaty wants to have inside, but like the details will be discussed like even further on once the treaty is established. So how we're going to monitor activities in the high seas regarding, I don't know, areas such as marine protected areas or whatnot will, as far as I know, will be in discussion after the treaty is established. And for the organization that I work for in South Korea, electric monitoring and vessels, those are also certain options that are being considered from what I know of. So yeah, that's just what I wanted to add.
So the treaty will be like a first step to even establish a framework to be able to regulate anything at all. And then afterwards is where the work really begins to turn into something that works too.
I think that's one of the key points of the high seas that's being recognized, and I think the first step is to have that framework and then bring in other aspects into it. So I think I'll open the floor to the audience in case they have any questions. Feel free to raise your hand or even put it in the chat box. You can unmute and ask your question as well. So if you have any question to our panelists, please, it's the time is now to ask your questions and doubts. So if anyone has, just raise your hand and we'll take the question. If not, I think Esther can take the game, and we can complete the game that Esther started. Does anyone
Yes,
have
of
any
course,
questions?
but I don't want to lock anyone from asking questions. So
Yeah. Exactly. So if anyone has a question, please feel free to put it in the chat box, or even raise your hand so they can unmute and then ask the question to our panelists. I don't see anyone raising their hands yet. So maybe if you have any questions going on later in the forward, just send us an email as well. We can then reach out to our speakers and then get their responses and then send them back to you. So maybe if you don't have, maybe Esther, you can take it forward, and then let's see if any questions come in, and we can take it towards the end.
all right then. I'm so sorry for that. It's going to work this time. I'm trying to share my screen again.
Yeah, just a second, Esther, just a second. I'll just. Yeah, you should be able to. You're the co-host. So yeah.
You've already made me co-host, right?
Yeah, go ahead, Esther.
All right.
Esther, you sharing the screen because we can't see anything yet.
Yes, I'm trying to do that right now. Just a moment.
Okay.
Just. I'm not sure if you guys can see my screen now.
Yeah, we can see it now.
Okay. It's just going to load in a moment.
Yeah. After that, there are no questions. I think we'll have to. After the game, we'll close the event.
Right. So I'm gonna start again. I'm so sorry to take you back, but I hope everyone manages to join now. From the initial steps that we did previously. Now it's taking much longer than even the first time. But yes, I'm starting it now. So we had the link at the chat box already. So you can just like load the pin. If we don't have the link, I can see if I can share it again. I'm gonna paste it again.
I'll share it.
And then you can put it, you can key in the pin. I'm gonna give say 2 minutes for everybody to join. All right, 1 more minute. There's somebody who dropped off. I hope they're not having a problem, but I'm going to start the game right now. So when the question pops out on your screen, you have 20 seconds to make sure that you provide the answer that you feel is the most correct. So we have time up for the first question and we go to the next question. You can see Sava is leading at the board. We're going to the next question. Elisa had already given the answer to this, so I don't expect anyone to fail in this question. We have time up for the next, for the second question. And we're still having, we have somebody else now is leading, Lydia, and Sava is at second position, and we have a Crab and Jay. So you're going to the next with that question. We have time up for that question, and we get to see who got to the top of the mountain this time. We're still having Lydia at the top, and there's a fish now. We go to the fourth question. We have time up for that question. Let's see. most of the people got it right. And we can see the amazing scores there, almost around the same range. So we go to the next question, the fifth one. We have time up for that question. We can see some good scores going up. We have Ash now. I didn't see the name earlier. And then now we're going to the next question, the sixth question about coral reefs. Time up for that question as well. Let's get to see who led. You're still having Lydia. And I can see Naive now at the second position and some good scores there. We go to the seventh question. We've learned about the high seas and we want to defend the deep now. We must know the deepest part of the ocean. Thank you so much for your responses on that question. Let's get to see. We can see scores and tables turning. Thank you so much. We go to the almost the last questions. We have the eighth question. Where does the color of the ocean come from? Does it come from the sunlight? The blue color of the ocean. Thank you so much. So Lydia is still at the top, and now we have a crab that has appeared on the jump board. We go to the last question, I think. No, the second last question. What SDG focuses on conserving the ocean? Everybody is going to get this, I believe. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Now we're going to the last question. Yeah, it's a true or false question. Like I already provided a leakage. Right. Thank you so much and having the fish one, and we have in Sawa the second position and Lydia the first position. We're having the three best performers in the game. So congratulations. And I hope this game was helpful in helping us learn more about the ocean and make us feel more connected to the ocean. So thank you so much. Back to you, Suruthi.
Thank you so much, Esther, for the game. I think had you played in the beginning, we would have had more people. And so I think it's almost time and we can close the side event. So I would like to thank all our participants and all our speakers and panelists who joined us and provided a very informative session on rights-based approach to marine conservation, something that's not talked about often. And in the land space it is, but not in the marine space much. So thank you, Mark, Lydia, Ida, Jiyun, Elisa, and Divya for joining us and sharing your experience and insights for rights-based approach to marine conservation. And thank you to all the participants who've joined us today, and see you all later. Bye.
Thank you to the organizers.
Bye.